A man who changed literature forever spent 5 years as a slave in North Africa. The author who created the world's first modern novel lost his left hand in battle. Miguel de Cervantes lived a life so improbable that if he'd written it as fiction, no one would have believed him. Most people know Don Quixote, fewer know the man who wrote it, and almost no one knows that Cervantes penned his masterpiece while broke, aging, and largely forgotten by the world he'd once tried so desperately to impress. His life wasn't a straight line from obscurity to genius. It was a mess of wrong turns, bad luck, and moments where everything fell apart. We're going to follow that journey from beginning to end, from a Spain drunk on empire to the prison cells where great ideas are born. This is the complete life of Miguel de Cervantes. The year is 1547. Spain controls half the known world. Gold flows from the Americas. The Spanish Empire stretches across Europe, and the Inquisition ensures everyone believes the right things or suffers the consequences. Into this world of power and paranoia, a fourth child arrives in the town of Alcalá de Henares. His parents name him Miguel. His father, Rodrigo, is a surgeon. Not the prestigious kind, the barber surgeon variety, who sets bones, pulls teeth, and bleeds patients when they fall ill. It's respectable work, but it doesn't make you rich. The Cervantes family moves constantly, chasing opportunities that never quite materialize. From Alcalá to Valladolid, from Córdoba to Seville, young Miguel learns early that stability is a luxury his family cannot afford. We know almost nothing about his childhood. No letters survive, no school records. Later biographers have filled the gaps with speculation, but the truth is we're guessing. What we do know is that by the time Miguel reaches his teens, the family has settled in Madrid, the capital, where ambitious men come to make their fortunes or lose everything trying. Madrid in the 1560s pulses with energy. It's newly designated as Spain's permanent capital, and everyone wants to be where power concentrates. The court attracts nobles, artists, merchants, and schemers. Miguel watches all of it. He's educated, though how much and by whom remains unclear. He reads voraciously, poetry, chivalric romances, the Italian masters. He's particularly obsessed with the tales of knights errant, those wandering heroes who right wrongs and rescue damsels. Remember that obsession. It'll matter later. By 1569, something goes wrong. Miguel is 22, and suddenly he's fleeing Spain. A warrant has been issued for his arrest. The charge, wounding a man named Antonio de Segura in a duel. The sentence, if caught, his right hand cut off and 10 years exile. He doesn't wait around to see if the authorities are serious. He runs. He ends up in Rome, the city of popes and Renaissance glory. He finds work in the household of Cardinal Giulio Acquaviva, a powerful churchman with connections across Europe. For a young Spaniard with no prospects, it's a lifeline. He serves as a chamber assistant, which sounds menial, but puts him close to power. He sees how the world really works, who bows to whom, how favours are traded, the gap between what people say and what they do. But Miguel doesn't want to be a servant forever. Italy is crawling with Spanish soldiers. The Ottoman Empire threatens Christian Europe, and Spain leads the military response. For a young man seeking glory, the choice is obvious. In 1570, Miguel enlists in a Spanish infantry regiment. He trades the cardinal's household for a soldier's life. Now here's where his story intersects with history. The Ottoman Empire, under Sultan Selim II, is expanding aggressively. The Pope calls for a Holy League, a coalition of Christian powers to stop Turkish advance. Spain, Venice, and the Papal States assemble a massive fleet. 200 galleys, 80,000 men, the largest Christian naval force in decades. Miguel de Cervantes is among them. He's assigned to the Marquesa, a galley in the fleet. His job is simple. When the shooting starts, fight. And in October 1571, the shooting very much starts. The Battle of Lepanto unfolds in the Gulf of Patras, off the coast of Greece. It's not a battle, It's a slaughter. Two massive fleets collide in what becomes the last major galley engagement in history. The air fills with arrows, cannonballs, and the screams of men burning alive as ships catch fire. It's chaos on a scale Miguel has never imagined. He's sick that day. Fever. His commanders tell him to stay below deck where it's safer. He refuses. He demands to be placed where the fighting is thickest. They put him on deck. Within minutes of engagement, an arquebus ball tears through his chest. Another shatters his left hand. He keeps fighting. By the time the battle ends, the Holy League has won a decisive victory. The Ottoman fleet is destroyed. 15,000 Christians who'd been enslaved as galley rowers are freed. But 30,000 men are dead or wounded. Miguel is among the wounded, bleeding from multiple injuries, his left hand permanently crippled. He spends months recovering in a hospital in Messina. The hand never heals properly. For the rest of his life, he'll be unable to use it. In an era when physical prowess matters, when duels are common and appearances count, he's marked. But he's also proud. He fought at Lepanto. He stood when others might have hidden. That battle will define how he sees himself for decades. Once recovered, he rejoins the military. This surprises modern readers. You'd think nearly dying would be enough. But Miguel needs the money. He needs the status. Being a veteran of Lepanto means something. For the next 4 years, he serves in various campaigns across the Mediterranean. Tunis, Naples, Sardinia. He's a good soldier. His commanders notice. They give him letters of recommendation, praising his service and courage. In September 1575, Miguel decides it's time to go home. He's been away from Spain for 6 years. He has his letters of recommendation from commanders, including a glowing endorsement from Don John of Austria, the hero of Lepanto himself. These letters should guarantee him advancement, maybe a position at court, maybe a command. Finally, his fortunes will turn. He boards the galley Sol with his younger brother, Rodrigo, who's also been serving. They sail from Naples towards Spain. The Mediterranean crossing should take a week, maybe 2. They're almost home. On September 26th, off the coast of France, 3 Ottoman galleys appear on the horizon. Pirates led by an Albanian renegade named Arnaud Mami. The Sol tries to run. It's not fast enough. The pirates overtake them. What follows is swift and brutal. The Spanish crew fights, but they're outnumbered. The pirates board. Within an hour, it's over. Everyone on the Sol is now a prisoner. The pirates search the captives for valuables. They find Miguel's letters of recommendation, letters from Don John of Austria, letters praising Miguel as a man of importance. The pirates read them and reach a conclusion. This crippled soldier must be someone significant, someone whose family will pay an enormous ransom. They're wrong. Miguel is nobody. His family's broke, but the pirates don't know that. They chain Miguel and Rodrigo and set course for Algiers, the North African coast, the centre of the Barbary slave trade, where Christian captives are bought, sold, and held until someone pays to free them. Miguel de Cervantes, veteran of Lepanto, has just become a slave. Algiers in 1575 is unlike anywhere Miguel has seen. It's a city built on slavery. 30,000 Christian captives work in the quarries, the docks, the galleys. Some are treated relatively well, especially if their captors think a ransom is coming. Others are worked to death. The city operates on a simple economy. Capture Christians, extract ransoms, repeat. Miguel and Rodrigo are placed in the household of the Dali, the Ottoman governor. It's better than the quarries, but only just. Miguel is assigned to labour, but because his captors think he's valuable, he's not brutalised the way ordinary captives are. They're waiting for the ransom money they're certain is coming. It never does. Miguel's family has nothing. They scrape together what they can, beg from relatives, petition the church for help. It's nowhere near enough. Meanwhile, Miguel sits in captivity, watching the months turn to years. But he doesn't sit quietly. This is where his character reveals itself. He starts organising escape attempts. The first involves a plot to reach the Spanish fortress at Oran 60 miles away. Miguel convinces a group of captives to make a run for it. They hire a Moorish guide. The guide betrays them immediately. The escape fails before it begins. Miguel takes full responsibility. He tells his captors that he planned everything, that the others were following his orders. It's a lie designed to protect the other captives from punishment. Remarkably, it works. The Dali is impressed by Miguel's courage and leadership. He increases the ransom demand, but doesn't execute him. Miguel tries again, and again. Over 5 years, he launches 4 separate escape attempts. One involves digging a tunnel. Another involves a secret hideout in a cave. None succeed. Each time, Miguel insists he's the mastermind. Each time, his captors punish him, but don't kill him. They still think someone will eventually pay. During these years, Miguel sees things that will haunt his writing forever. The casual cruelty of slavery, the way human beings are reduced to property, the complex relationships between captives and captors, some marked by brutality, others by a strange mutual respect. He meets renegades, Christians who've converted to Islam to improve their circumstances. He sees how desperate people compromise, survive, adapt. He also writes, in captivity, with nothing but time, he begins composing poetry. Plays, stories, most of it is lost now, but the habit forms. Writing becomes how he processes what's happening, how he maintains his sanity. In 1580, 5 years after his capture, the money finally arrives. Not enough for both brothers. Miguel insists Rodrigo be freed first. His younger brother sails for Spain, promising to raise the rest of Miguel's ransom. Miguel remains behind, watching the ship disappear over the horizon. 5 months later, in September 1580, the final payment comes through. Trinitarian friars, a religious order dedicated to ransoming captives, have collected enough. Miguel de Cervantes is finally free. He's 33 years old. He's spent 5 years as a slave. His youth is gone. His left hand is crippled. He has no money, no prospects, and no idea what comes next. He boards a ship for Spain. As the North African coast recedes behind him, he has no way of knowing that his greatest work is still decades away, that the suffering, the humiliation, the years of watching human nature at its worst and occasionally its best are all material. He'll eventually transform into something unprecedented. The ship carrying Miguel de Cervantes docks in Denia on the eastern coast of Spain in October 1580. He steps onto Spanish soil for the first time in 10 years. The man who left was a promising young soldier. The man returning is a crippled veteran with empty pockets and a head full of nightmares. He makes his way to Madrid. The capital has changed. Spain is at the height of its power under Philip II. The empire stretches across the globe. Gold flows in from the Americas. The court glitters with wealth. But none of that wealth finds its way to Miguel. He needs work, any work. He tries the obvious path first, petitioning for a military position. He has credentials after all. Lepanto, 5 years in captivity, multiple escape attempts. Surely that counts for something. He writes letters. He waits in antechambers. He pulls whatever strings his family connections allow, which aren't many. The response is a wall of indifference. The war is over. The Navy is downsizing. There are thousands of veterans looking for positions. Miguel's service, while admirable, is not unique. His injury makes him less useful. And he has no patron, no powerful friend to advocate for him. The doors stay closed, so he pivots. If the government won't employ him, perhaps the church will. He applies for positions in the colonies, the Spanish territories, in the Americas, where the church is always looking for administrators. He's educated, literate, experienced. He could serve as a clerk, a secretary, something. Again, he waits. Again, nothing comes. The rejections pile up. Miguel is 33 years old and facing the reality that his youth was spent on a cause that no longer values him. The hand he sacrificed at Lepanto, the hand he called his glory, has become a liability. Spain has moved on. He hasn't. He starts writing seriously now. Not just poetry and fragments, but full theatrical works. The Spanish theatre is booming in the 1580s. Madrid has multiple playhouses. Audiences are hungry for entertainment. Successful playwrights can actually make money. Miguel writes quickly, drawing on everything he's seen. He writes about captivity in Algiers, about soldiers, about the clash between Christian and Muslim worlds. He produces 20 to 30 plays over the next few years. Most are lost now. We know the titles of a few. The Treaty of Algiers, The Gallant Spaniard. They're performed. They earn him some money, but he's not a star. The theatre world already has its giants. Lope de Vega is dominating the stage with hundreds of plays. Miguel is one writer among many, scraping by. In 1584, he makes a decision that will define the next phase of his life. He marries. Her name is Catalina de Salazar y Palacios. She's 18 years old. He's 37. She comes from a small town called Esquivias, south of Madrid. Her family has some land, some modest means. It's not a love match. Miguel needs stability. Catalina's family needs to marry her off. The marriage produces no children. Miguel and Catalina will live apart for most of their marriage. He'll spend decades travelling for work, while she stays in Esquivias. It's not unusual for the time, but it's not happy either. The arrangement gives Miguel freedom but no real home. He needs income. The plays aren't enough. In 1587, he takes a job that will consume the next 2 decades of his life. He becomes a commissary for the Spanish Armada. His job is to travel through Andalusia in southern Spain, requisitioning supplies for the fleet. Wheat, oil, barley, anything the navy needs. It's thankless work. He shows up in small towns with government authorization to seize grain. The locals hate him. They see a crippled official taking their food for a war machine they don't care about. Miguel has to negotiate, argue, sometimes threaten. He fills out endless paperwork. He travels constantly on bad roads, staying in terrible inns. And he's terrible with money. The accounting required for this position is beyond him. He mixes his personal funds with government funds. He loses receipts. He makes mistakes in the ledgers. It's not corruption exactly, it's incompetence. But the result is the same. In 1590, he applies again for a position in the Americas. He lists his service at Lepanto, his years in captivity, his current work for the crown. The response comes back brief and brutal. Let him look for something here. The door to the colonies is permanently closed. He keeps travelling through Andalusia. Seville becomes his base of operations. It's a rough port city, gateway to the Americas, full of sailors and merchants and criminals. Miguel lives in cheap boarding houses. He drinks in taverns. He observes. The Spain he sees in these years is not the glittering court of Madrid. It's the Spain of rogues and swindlers, priests and prostitutes, conmen and desperate peasants. It's the Spain he'll eventually write about. In 1592, disaster strikes. Miguel is contracted to collect taxes in Granada. He deposits the money with a banker in Seville. The banker goes bankrupt. The money disappears. Miguel is held responsible. He's thrown into the royal prison of Seville. The cell is crowded and filthy. Murderers, thieves, debtors, all crammed together. Miguel is 50 years old. His left hand is still crippled from Lepanto. His right hand is now the only tool he has. And in that prison, surrounded by criminals and failure, something begins to take shape in his mind. He starts imagining a character, an old man, a reader of chivalric romances, someone who's read so many tales of knights and quests that he's lost his grip on reality. Someone who decides, despite his age and irrelevance, to become a knight himself, to right wrongs, to fight injustice, to live according to the ideals he's read about in books. The character is absurd. He's the opposite of every heroic knight in literature. He's old, poor, delusional. He'll fail at everything he attempts, but there's something in the idea that won't let go, something about the gap between ideals and reality, between what we imagine and what we are, between the stories we tell ourselves and the world as it actually exists. Miguel gets out of prison after 3 months when the authorities realize he wasn't embezzling, just incompetent, but the damage is done. His reputation as a tax collector is destroyed. He tries to continue working, but the commissions dry up. He's back to writing plays, but the theatre has moved on. Lope de Vega is producing 3 plays a week. Miguel can't compete. By 1597, he's in prison again. Another financial discrepancy, another stretch in jail. He's 50 years old and his life is a catalogue of failure. The promising young soldier has become a disgraced functionary. The decorated veteran of Lepanto is forgotten. The playwright can't get his work performed. But something is still brewing. In the gaps between jobs, in the evenings after long days of travel, in prison cells and cheap rooms, he's writing. Not plays now. Prose. A story about a man who reads too much, who mistakes fiction for truth, who becomes so lost in fantasy that he remakes himself as a knight-errant. He calls the character Alonso Quijano, a gentleman from La Mancha, a nobody from nowhere, who renames himself Don Quixote de la Mancha and sets out to revive the age of chivalry in a world that has no use for it. Miguel works on it slowly. There's no commission, no guarantee anyone will publish it, no reason to think it will succeed where everything else has failed. But he keeps writing because it's all he has left. The story grows. Don Quixote acquires a squire, Sancho Panza, a peasant who's the opposite of his master. Practical, where Quixote is idealistic. Earthy, where Quixote is elevated. Together they ride through Spain, having adventures that are really misadventures, mistaking windmills for giants, attacking sheep they believe are armies, liberating prisoners who rob them. It's funny, Miguel is writing comedy now, something he'd never quite managed in his plays. But it's not just funny. There's something else underneath, a sadness, a recognition that idealism in a corrupt world is both noble and foolish, that the gap between what we dream and what we achieve defines the human condition. He's drawing on everything, the romances he read as a boy, the battlefield at Lepanto where reality shattered fantasy, the years in captivity where he saw human nature stripped bare, the decades of wandering through Spain's underbelly, seeing how people actually live versus how they're supposed to live, the prisons, the failures, the constant grinding disappointment of a life that promised much and delivered little. By 1604, he has a manuscript. It's long, digressive, full of stories within stories. He's 57 years old. He finds a publisher in Madrid, Francisco de Robles. They negotiate a contract. Miguel will receive almost nothing up front. Any profits depend on sales, but at least it will be printed. The title is The Ingenious Gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha. It's published in January 1605. Miguel has no idea what will happen. He's published before to silence. Most writers die unknown. Their books sink without trace. This time is different. Within weeks, people are talking about it. Within months, it's being read across Spain. By the end of the year, it's the most talked about book in the Spanish-speaking world. Pirates immediately start printing unauthorized editions, which is actually a sign of success. Nobody bothers to steal books that don't sell. Why does it work? Nobody quite knows, including Miguel. The book is strange. It's a parody of chivalric romances, but it's also somehow affectionate toward them. It mocks Don Quixote's delusions, but also makes you care about him. Sancho Panza starts as comic relief but becomes surprisingly wise. The adventures are ridiculous, but underneath them is something genuine about friendship, loyalty, and the human need for meaning in a meaningless world. Readers recognize themselves in it. The intellectuals see a sophisticated critique of literary conventions. The common readers just find it hilarious. Everyone quotes it. The phrases enter the language, tilting at windmills. the impossible dream, the Knight of the Sorrowful Countenance. Miguel de Cervantes is suddenly famous at 58 years old. After decades of obscurity, rejection, and failure, he's produced something that matters. The book doesn't make him rich, the pirated editions see to that, and his contract was terrible, but it makes him known. People want to meet him. Other writers acknowledge him. He's no longer the forgotten veteran, the failed tax collector, the mediocre playwright. He's the author of Don Quixote. And he's not done. Within months of publication, he starts planning a sequel. He has more to say about his deluded knight and his practical squire. More adventures, more conversations, more explorations of the space between fantasy and reality. But writing the sequel will take time, and time is something Miguel de Cervantes is running out of. Success changes nothing about Miguel's daily circumstances. He's famous now, yes, but fame in 1605 doesn't pay rent. The unauthorized editions flooding Spain mean he sees almost no money from Don Quixote's popularity. Francisco de Robles, his publisher, does well. The pirates do better. Miguel gets recognition and not much else. He's still living hand to mouth in Valladolid, still dependent on his sisters, still scrambling for whatever work he can find. Being the author of the most talked about book in Spain doesn't exempt you from needing to eat. The irony isn't lost on him. He's written a book about the gap between dreams and reality, and here he is, living that gap. But something has shifted internally. For the first time in decades, Miguel feels like he has a purpose beyond mere survival. People want more Don Quixote. They're already asking about it. What happens next? Where does the knight go? The character has escaped the book and become real in readers' minds. They debate whether Don Quixote is mad or wise, whether Sancho is foolish or the only sane person in the story, whether the whole thing is comedy or tragedy or something else entirely. Miguel starts working on the sequel almost immediately, but he's older now, 58 going on 59, and the writing comes harder. His hand cramps, his eyes tire. The words that flowed for the first book now require more effort. He's also more ambitious this time. The first Don Quixote was an experiment. He wasn't sure what he was doing, which gave him freedom. Now he knows people are watching, waiting, expecting. That knowledge is paralysing and motivating in equal measure. The household in Valladolid is crowded and complicated. His sisters are there. His daughter Isabel, now in her 20s, is there. His niece Constanza. Various other relatives and hangers-on who attach themselves to any family with even modest means. The house is never quiet. There's always someone arguing, crying, laughing, slamming doors. Miguel writes in whatever corner he can find, whenever he can steal a few hours. In 1606, the court moves back to Madrid. Valladolid's brief moment as Spain's capital is over. The city empties of nobles and officials. For Miguel's family, this is a problem. Valladolid's economy was built on serving the court. When the court leaves, opportunities dry up. They need to follow. So in 1607, Miguel packs up everything again. Back to Madrid, back to the city where he'd lived on and off for decades, always on the margins, always struggling. This time at least he arrives with a reputation. He's not nobody anymore. They settle in the literary quarter, near other writers and publishers. The neighbourhood is cheaper than the fashionable districts, but has its own energy. Printers, booksellers, poets, playwrights, con artists, dreamers. Everyone is writing something, selling something, scheming something. Miguel fits right in. He's been all of these things at various points. Now he's the famous one, which is strange. Younger writers seek him out, wanting advice, wanting to be associated with success. Miguel is gracious but bemused. He's been on the other side of this, being the nobody who wants acknowledgement from the established figure. He remembers how it feels to be dismissed. The literary world of Madrid in the early 1600s is vicious. Writers form factions. They write savage reviews of each other's work. They spread rumours. They compete for patronage, for attention, for the limited opportunities available. Miguel has rivals now. something he never had when he was obscure. Lope de Vega, still the king of Spanish theatre, makes snide comments about Don Quixote. He's probably jealous. His plays are popular, but no single work of his has achieved what Miguel's novel has. Other writers pile on, calling the book crude, saying it's not real literature, dismissing it as popular entertainment for the uneducated masses. Miguel ignores most of it. He's old enough and has failed enough to know that success breeds resentment. Also, he's busy. He's still working on the sequel, but slowly. He's also writing short stories, novellas, whatever he can sell. The money from Don Quixote is gone, absorbed by family expenses and debts. He needs steady income. In 1613, he publishes a collection of short stories called exemplary novels. They're good. Some critics think they're better than Don Quixote. They showcase Miguel's range, his ability to write in different styles, to create distinct voices and worlds. There's comedy and tragedy, romance and realism. The stories sell reasonably well. Not Don Quixote numbers, but enough to matter. But the sequel to Don Quixote is what people really want. Miguel knows this. He also knows he's running out of time. He's 66 in 1613. He's been sick on and off for years. Nothing specific, just the general wearing down of a body that's endured too much. The battlefield wound still bothers him. His digestion is shot. He tires easily. Writing requires sitting for hours, which hurts his back. But he pushes through, because what else is there? Stopping means giving up, and he's never been good at that. Then in 1614, something infuriating happens. A book appears claiming to be the sequel to Don Quixote. It's not written by Miguel. It's written by someone using the pseudonym Alonso Fernández de Avellaneda. Nobody knows who this person actually is. The book is a crude imitation, poorly written, full of cheap jokes. Don Quixote becomes a buffoon. Sancho becomes an idiot. Everything subtle in Miguel's original is flattened into slapstick. Critics pan it. Readers buy it anyway, because they're desperate for more Don Quixote, and this is the only sequel available. Miguel is furious. This is theft. Someone has stolen his characters, his creation, and turned them into something vulgar. Worse, they're making money from it. The fake sequel sells, and while it's selling, Miguel still hasn't finished his own sequel. He's been working on it for 9 years. He's got hundreds of pages, but it's not done. It's never quite right. He keeps revising, adding, changing. Perfectionism and uncertainty are slowing him down. Now there's urgency. He needs to finish his real sequel before the fake one defines what happens next. He works faster. The anger helps. He also makes a decision. His sequel will acknowledge the fake one's existence. Don Quixote and Sancho will encounter people who've read the unauthorized continuation. They'll be offended by how they're portrayed. Miguel will write reality and fiction colliding, which is what his whole project has been about anyway. If someone is going to steal his characters, he'll steal them back and do something interesting with the theft. The writing accelerates through 1614 and into 1615. Miguel is 68 now, working against his failing body and the clock. He's also writing with a confidence he's never had before. The first Don Quixote was experimental. He wasn't sure if it would work. The sequel is bolder. He's playing with structure and metafiction in ways nobody has attempted. Characters debate whether they're real or fictional. They worry about how they'll be remembered. Don Quixote meets people who've read the book about him and has to deal with being a celebrity. It's postmodern before there's a word for postmodern. The sequel is also sadder. The first book has melancholy underneath its comedy, but the second book makes it explicit. Don Quixote is getting older, like Miguel. The adventures are taking a toll. Reality keeps intruding on fantasy. The knight's defeats are harder to bounce back from. Sancho has grown wiser, which makes him see more clearly how impossible his master's quest is. The friendship between them deepens, but so does the tragedy of their situation. They're trying to live in a world that doesn't exist anymore, if it ever did. Miguel finishes the manuscript in spring 1615. He's exhausted. The last year of concentrated work has drained him. But it's done. He takes it to Francisco de Robles, who's eager to publish. The fake sequel is still selling. The real one will sell better. They rush it through production. In November 1615, The Ingenious Gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha Part 2 is published. 10 years after the first book. A decade of waiting, working, doubting, persisting. The response is immediate. Readers recognize that this is the real thing. The fake sequel is forgotten almost instantly. Miguel's version is richer, stranger, more moving than anything in the first book. The ending particularly strikes people. Don Quixote returns home, renounces his delusions, and dies. Not in battle, not in some grand adventure, but quietly in bed. Having realized that he's been foolish, Sancho begs him to keep going, to have one more adventure, but the night is done. He sees clearly now, he was mad, and seeing clearly kills him. It's devastating. Readers finish the book and feel like they've lost someone real, because in a sense they have. Miguel has killed off his most famous creation, made it impossible for anyone else to continue the story. No more fake sequels, no more unauthorized adventures. Don Quixote's story is complete, the night is dead, and there's nothing left to say. Critics debate whether the ending is too sad, whether Miguel has betrayed his own character. Some think he should have let Don Quixote die believing in his quest, but Miguel knows what he's doing. The whole point is the collision between fantasy and reality. Don Quixote has to face reality eventually. That's what the entire 2 volumes have been building toward. The tragedy isn't that he was deluded. The tragedy is that reality offers nothing worth living for once the delusion is gone. Miguel is 68 years old and has written his masterpiece. Both parts together form something unprecedented in European literature, a long prose narrative that's simultaneously funny and sad, realistic and fantastical, simple and complex. It's full of stories within stories, characters who know their characters, debates about literature and life and truth. It's everything Miguel learned in his 70 years compressed into 1,000 pages about a mad knight and his patient squire. The book sells well, better than the first volume. Pirates still steal it, but Miguel sees slightly more money this time. Not enough to matter financially, but enough to feel like some kind of recognition. He's done something. After all the failures, all the disappointments, all the years of being nobody, he's created something that will outlast him. He knows this. People tell him. Don Quixote has become part of Spanish culture in just 10 years. The phrases, the characters, the situations, everyone knows them. But knowing you've succeeded doesn't change the fact that you're dying. Miguel is sick through late 1615 and into 1616. Not dramatically sick, just the slow fading of an old body that's been used hard. He has trouble breathing. His energy is gone. He stays in bed more. He's working on one more book, a romance called The Travails of Percivale and Sigismunda. He'd started it years ago. It's different from Don Quixote, more traditional, more like the romances he loved as a boy. He wants to finish it. He's not sure why. Maybe to prove he can write something else. Maybe because the kid who dreamed of writing epic adventures never quite died, even after everything. Spring 1616 arrives. Miguel is bedridden now. He knows he's dying, no illusions left. He's lived longer than most people in his era, survived more than most people survive. War, captivity, poverty, obscurity, failure, success, all of it. He's tired. His wife Catalina is there, his sisters, his daughter Isabel. The household that's always been too crowded and too loud is gathered around him. He dictates a dedication for Percivale to his patron, the Count of Lemos. It's playful even now. He jokes about death coming for him, says goodbye to life, to his friends, to the world, hopes to see everyone in the next life. The dedication is dated April 19th, 1616. Miguel dies on April 22nd, 70 years old, used up, finished. The funeral is small. Miguel de Cervantes Saavedra, soldier, tax collector, prisoner, playwright, novelist, author of the most famous book in Spain, is buried in a Trinitarian convent in Madrid on April 23rd, 1616. The exact location of his grave will be lost. Centuries later, people will search for his bones. They'll dig up the convent, use ground-penetrating radar, analyze fragments. They'll never be completely sure they found him. The man who created the most famous character in Spanish literature will himself disappear into unmarked earth. The irony would probably amuse him. Within weeks of Miguel's death, something strange starts happening. Don Quixote begins spreading beyond Spain faster than anyone expected. The book crosses borders, gets translated, shows up in France, in England, in Italy. People who've never been to Spain are reading about a mad knight in La Mancha. The timing is almost supernatural. As if Miguel's death released the book into the world in a new way. In England, Shakespeare dies the same month as Miguel. Different calendar systems mean they die on the same date by some calculations, though not actually the same day. But the coincidence becomes symbolic. The two greatest writers of the age, dying together, passing the torch to something new. Neither man knew the other existed. Shakespeare never read Don Quixote, though an English translation was already circulating. Miguel probably never heard of this playwright in London, but history will forever link them. April 1616. The month literature changed. The first English translation appears in 1612, while Miguel is still alive, though he doesn't know it. Thomas Shelton translates part 1. It's rough, full of mistakes, but English readers love it anyway. They don't care about accuracy. They want the mad knight, the windmills, the adventures. Shelton gives them that. A French translation comes in 1614. German follows. Italian. Dutch. Within 50 years, Don Quixote exists in every major European language. Within a century, it's travelled to the Americas, to Asia, everywhere Spanish and European influence reaches. But here's what's strange. Nobody quite knows what to do with it. Is it a comedy? Obviously, yes. People laugh. The situations are absurd. The night is ridiculous. Sancho's peasant wisdom punctures every pretension. But is it just comedy? That feels wrong too. There's something else happening under the surface. Something about delusion and reality, about how we construct meaning, about what happens when the stories we tell ourselves collide with the world as it actually is. Early readers treat it as pure entertainment, a funny book about a crazy old man. They quote the jokes at dinner parties, they dress up as Don Quixote for festivals. The character becomes a cultural reference point almost immediately. But they're not quite sure what Miguel was trying to say. Was he mocking chivalric romances? Obviously. Was he mocking Spain? Probably not, but maybe? Was he saying something about human nature? Unclear. The Romantics in the late 1700s and early 1800s discover the book again and decide it's actually a tragedy. They see Don Quixote as a noble figure, crushed by a mundane world. The knight isn't ridiculous, he's heroic. He believes in something in an age of cynicism. He sees beauty where others see only ordinary reality. His delusion is actually vision. The Romantics make Don Quixote into a symbol of the artistic soul destroyed by bourgeois society. This reading becomes dominant for decades. Don Quixote, the tragic hero. Don Quixote, the martyr to imagination. Then the realists in the mid-1800s push back. No, they say, the book is about reality versus fantasy. Don Quixote is genuinely mad, and his madness causes real harm. He hurts people, destroys property, wastes everyone's time. The joke is on him. Miguel is showing us that romantic delusion leads nowhere good. The book is a warning against living in your head instead of dealing with the world as it is. By the 20th century, critics are finding layers nobody saw before. Some read it as a meditation on storytelling itself, the way characters become aware they're in a story, the way real people in Part 2 have read Part 1, the constant blurring between fiction and reality. It's metafiction before anyone had that word. It's postmodern before postmodernism. Miguel is doing something with narrative structure that won't be fully appreciated for 300 years. Others focus on the religious subtext. Don Quixote as Christ figure, wandering the earth trying to do good and being mocked for it. Sancho as the disciples, doubting but loyal. The whole book as religious allegory that Miguel had to disguise because the Inquisition was still watching. This reading finds evidence everywhere once you start looking. The hermits, the discussions of faith, the way Don Quixote suffers for trying to help others. Political readings multiply. Don Quixote as commentary on Spanish decline. Spain in the early 1600s is past its peak. The empire is crumbling. The wealth from the New World is draining away. The military glory is fading. And here's this old man trying to revive the age of chivalry, trying to bring back something that's gone forever. He's Spain. The whole country is Don Quixote, living in the past, unable to accept that the world has changed. Psychological interpretations emerge. Don Quixote as study of madness, of how the mind creates reality, of the defense mechanisms we use to cope with disappointment. Alonso Quijano reads too many romances because his life is empty. He invents Don Quixote because being a poor gentleman in a dying town is unbearable. The madness is protective. It gives him purpose, adventure, meaning. When he recovers his sanity at the end, he dies because reality offers nothing worth living for. The book becomes a case study in delusion and its functions. Feminist critics notice something everyone else missed. The female characters are more complex than they first appear. Dulcinea doesn't exist, but that's exactly the point. She's every woman who's been turned into a fantasy object, existing only in male imagination. The real women in the book, the innkeeper's daughters, the Duchess, Dorothea, they're smarter than the men. They understand what's happening. They play along or manipulate the situation to their advantage. Miguel is showing how women have to navigate male fantasy to survive. Every generation finds something new. Colonialism scholars see commentary on Spanish expansion. Disability studies scholars analyze Don Quixote's mental state through modern frameworks. Marxist critics examine class relations between master and servant. Queer theorists find homoerotic subtext in male partnerships. The book supports every interpretation because Miguel packed so much in. He wasn't trying to write a simple story. He was trying to capture everything he'd learned about human beings in 70 years of living. But here's the thing nobody disputes. The book invented the modern novel. Before Don Quixote, prose fiction in Europe was mostly romances, collections of tales or simple adventure narratives. After Don Quixote, everything changes. Miguel shows that prose fiction can be long and complex and serious, that it can have character development, psychological depth, structural sophistication, that you can play with narrative form, break the fourth wall, comment on your own story while telling it. Every major novelist after Miguel learned something from Don Quixote. Henry Fielding writes Tom Jones using techniques Miguel invented. Lawrence Stern writes Tristram Shandy, which is Don Quixote taken even further into metafiction. The entire tradition of the English novel grows from seeds Miguel planted. The Russians worship Don Quixote. Dostoevsky calls it the greatest book ever written. Turgenev, Tolstoy, they all study it, learn from it, try to capture something of what Miguel achieved. In Spanish literature, the influence is absolute. Every Spanish writer exists in Don Quixote's shadow. You either embrace it or react against it, but you can't ignore it. The book defines Spanish identity for centuries. The Mad Knight becomes Spain's representative to the world. Other countries have their literary heroes. Spain has this ridiculous, noble, deluded old man tilting at windmills. And somehow that feels exactly right. The images proliferate. Don Quixote in art, in opera, in ballet, in film. Picasso paints him. Dali paints him. Richard Strauss composes a tone poem. Massenet writes an opera. Balanchine choreographs a ballet. Orson Welles spends years trying to make a Don Quixote movie and never finishes it. Terry Gilliam tries twice and fails both times, which feels appropriate. The knight who can't succeed at anything has defeated multiple filmmakers. The phrase tilting at windmills enters every language. It means fighting imaginary enemies, wasting effort on pointless battles. But it also means something nobler. Having the courage to fight even when you know you'll lose. Believing in something despite all evidence. The phrase carries both meanings. That's Don Quixote in miniature. Is he a fool or a hero? Yes. Quixotic becomes an adjective, meaning unrealistic, impractical, idealistic, but also meaning brave, romantic, willing to dream. Again, both things at once. The word captures the ambiguity at the book's heart. Miguel never tells us definitively whether Don Quixote is admirable or absurd. The answer is, he's both. He's us. We're all Don Quixote sometimes, believing things that aren't true because we need to believe them. And we're all Sancho, following along because loyalty matters even when the cause is mad. The book keeps selling, year after year, decade after decade, century after century. New editions appear constantly. Illustrated versions, scholarly editions, modernized translations, abridged versions for children. Don Quixote never goes out of print. 400 years later, it's still read, still taught, still analysed. Most books from 1605 are studied only by specialists. Don Quixote is everywhere. Miguel couldn't have predicted this. He thought he was writing a funny book that mocked chivalric romances. He wanted to entertain people, make some money, maybe get a little respect before he died. He succeeded at the first two goals partly, and the third one barely. He died poor and mostly forgotten. The real fame came after, but that's literature. The writer creates the work, releases it into the world, and then loses control. Readers decide what it means. Each generation interprets it differently. The book Miguel wrote in 1605 and 1615 is the same book people read in 2024, but it's also completely different. We bring our own context, our own questions, our own needs. The book absorbs all of it. That's why it survives. Not because Miguel was deliberately writing for the ages. He wasn't thinking about posterity. He was thinking about his next meal. But he was honest. He put everything he knew into the book. His war experience, his captivity, his poverty, his failures, his observations about human nature. He didn't simplify. He didn't make it easy. He created something complex enough that 400 years of readers haven't exhausted it. The great novels do this. They're not perfect. Don Quixote has problems. The structure is loose. Some episodes drag. Miguel includes stories that don't quite fit. The prose is sometimes clumsy, but none of that matters because the whole thing is alive. You feel a consciousness behind it. Someone who lived and suffered and thought about things. Someone who understood that life is tragic and comic simultaneously. Someone who knew that we're all ridiculous and noble, wise and foolish, clear-sighted and deluded. That's what crosses the centuries. Not perfect craft, but lived truth. Miguel earned his wisdom the hard way. Nothing came easy. He was captured, enslaved, rejected, ignored, poor, exhausted. He kept going, he kept writing, and finally at the end, he created something that justified everything that came before. The suffering wasn't meaningless, it fed the work. Don Quixote survives because Miguel didn't lie. He didn't pretend life makes sense or that virtue gets rewarded or that following your dreams leads to happiness. He showed what actually happens when an old man decides to become a knight. The world doesn't cooperate. People mock him. He fails constantly. And yet there's something magnificent in the attempt, something human in the refusal to accept things as they are. Miguel understood that. He lived it. His whole life was tilting at windmills, trying to be a successful writer in a world that didn't want what he was offering, believing he had something to say when everyone told him to give up, keeping faith with his vision even when it brought him nothing but disappointment. He was Don Quixote, and he knew it. That's why the book works. He finished Don Quixote Part 2 in 1615. By then he was 68 years old, exhausted, sick. He'd been working on another book simultaneously, a romance called Persiles and Sigismunda. He thought that one would be his masterpiece. He was wrong, but he didn't know that yet. He kept writing until he couldn't anymore. April 1616. Miguel was dying. He knew it. Everyone knew it. His body was giving out after decades of abuse. The war wound that never healed properly. The years in Algerian prisons. The poverty, the stress, the constant struggle. It all catches up eventually. He joined a religious order, the Tertiaries of St. Francis, not because he'd become suddenly devout, though faith mattered to him, mostly for practical reasons. The order would handle his burial. His wife wouldn't have to pay for it. Even dying, he was worried about money. He wrote a dedication for Persiles. It's addressed to the Count of Lemos, one of his few patrons. The tone is strange. Miguel knows he's dying, but he's not solemn about it. He's almost playful. He talks about meeting a student on the road who recognized him. The student was thrilled. "You're Miguel de Cervantes." "Yes," Miguel said, "I am, but I'm also dying." The student didn't want to believe it. Miguel had to convince him. "Look, I'm sweating, I'm pale, my time is short." The student still protested. Miguel was amused. Even his death couldn't be simple. The dedication ends with Miguel saying goodbye. He knows he won't finish another book. This is it. His final words to the reading public. He signs off with a line from an old Spanish ballad. "Farewell to life, farewell to charm, farewell to merry friends. I am dying, and I wish to see you happy in the other life." 10 days after Miguel died, William Shakespeare died in England, April 23rd, 1616. Supposedly the same day, though the calendars were different. England was still using the Julian calendar. Spain had switched to Gregorian. They didn't actually die on the same day, but the coincidence is close enough that people notice it. The two greatest writers, in their respective languages, dying within days of each other, both in 1616. Shakespeare was famous when he died. He'd been successful, respected, financially comfortable. He owned property. His plays were performed regularly. People knew his name. Miguel died obscure. A few people in literary circles knew who he was. Most didn't care. Don Quixote was popular, but Miguel wasn't. Nobody thought he was the Spanish Shakespeare. They thought he was a guy who'd written one funny book 20 years ago. The fame came slowly, then suddenly. Within a few decades, Don Quixote was being translated. French, English, Italian, German. It spread across Europe. People started calling it a masterpiece. By 1700, Miguel was posthumously famous. By 1800, he was canonical. By 1900, he was the Spanish writer, the one everyone knew. Why did it take so long? Partly because literary reputations always take time to solidify. Partly because Spain was declining as a world power, and its culture became less visible. Partly because the novel as a form wasn't fully established yet. People didn't quite know what Don Quixote was. A satire? A romance? A comedy? All of the above? The Romantics loved it. They saw Don Quixote as a tragic hero, a pure soul destroyed by a corrupt world. That wasn't exactly Miguel's intention, but it worked. Each era found something different in the book. The Enlightenment praised its rationalism. The Romantics praised its idealism. The Modernists praised its formal innovation. The Postmodernists praised its self-awareness. Everyone could claim Don Quixote as theirs. That's the sign of a truly great book. It's big enough to contain contradictions, flexible enough to survive changing tastes. Miguel didn't live to see any of this. He died thinking he'd failed. He'd wanted respect, recognition, financial security. He got none of it. His last years were spent in poverty, ignored by the literary establishment, struggling to finish books that he hoped would finally bring him success. Persiles came out posthumously in 1617. It sold well initially. People were curious about Cervantes' final work. Then it faded. Now it's barely read, except by scholars. Miguel had bet on the wrong book. He thought Persiles was his masterpiece. History decided Don Quixote was. That's the cruel joke. Writers never know which of their works will survive. They guess wrong constantly. Miguel spent years on plays that nobody remembers. He wrote Persiles thinking it would be his legacy. He wrote Don Quixote almost by accident, and it became immortal. What made the difference? Honesty. Don Quixote feels true in a way his other works don't. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't following rules. He was just writing what amused him, what interested him, what he'd observed about human behaviour. He put his whole self into it. His humour, his bitterness, his compassion, his cynicism, all of it. The book is messy because life is messy. It contradicts itself because people contradict themselves. It's funny and sad simultaneously because that's how experience works. Miguel wasn't simplifying or sanitizing. He was showing things as they are. That's rare. Most writers clean things up. They make stories neater than life actually is. They impose patterns, meanings, resolutions. Miguel didn't. He let the story sprawl. He let characters behave inconsistently. He let episodes go nowhere. And somehow it works because it feels authentic. Don Quixote isn't about plot, it's about consciousness. Two men travelling through Spain, talking, observing, arguing, getting into trouble. That's it. The pleasure comes from spending time with these characters, seeing how they think, watching them interact with the world. Miguel invented something. Not the novel exactly. Other people were experimenting with prose fiction. But he invented a particular kind of novel. The novel where the author is aware he's writing a novel. Where the characters are aware they're characters. Where reality and fiction blur constantly. Part 2 does this explicitly. Characters have read Part 1. They argue about it. They meet people who've read it. Don Quixote has become famous within his own story. The line between the real world and the fictional world dissolves. This was revolutionary. Nobody had done it before. Metafiction, we'd call it now. Fiction that comments on itself. That's aware of its own artifice. Miguel was doing it in 1615, 400 years before postmodernism made it fashionable. Why? Because he'd lived enough to understand that reality isn't simple, that truth isn't straightforward, that stories shape how we see the world as much as the world shapes our stories. Don Quixote goes mad from reading too many books. But maybe the books reveal truths that so-called reality obscures. Maybe madness is sanity, and sanity is madness. Maybe we're all living in stories we've told ourselves. Miguel knew this from experience. He'd lived through situations that shouldn't have happened. Captured by pirates, enslaved for 5 years, survived multiple escape attempts that should have gotten him killed. Returned home to a country that didn't want him. Tried to make a living as a writer when writers starved. Kept going when any reasonable person would have quit. His life made no sense. It followed no pattern. There was no justice, no logic, no narrative arc. Things happened randomly. Good actions led to bad outcomes. Bad actions went unpunished. Virtue brought no reward. Persistence meant nothing. And yet he survived. He wrote, he created something that outlasted everything that hurt him. The Spanish Empire that sent him to war collapsed. The Ottoman Empire that enslaved him collapsed. The literary establishment that ignored him is forgotten. Don Quixote remains. There's a lesson in that, though Miguel probably wouldn't phrase it as a lesson. He was suspicious of lessons. Life doesn't teach lessons, it just happens. You endure it, you observe it, you try to make something from it. If you're lucky and talented and stubborn enough, you create something worth keeping. Miguel was all three. lucky in the sense that he lived long enough to write his masterpiece. Talented in ways that nobody fully recognized during his lifetime. Stubborn beyond all reason. Any sensible person would have quit writing after the first decade of rejection. Miguel kept going for 40 years. The stubbornness matters. Talent alone doesn't create great works. Lots of talented people give up. The ones who succeed are the ones who refuse to stop, who keep writing through failure, poverty, illness, rejection, indifference, who believe in their vision even when nobody else does. Miguel believed. He had to. He'd given too much to quit. Writing was the only thing he'd ever been good at, the only thing that gave his suffering meaning. If he stopped, everything he'd endured would be pointless. So he didn't stop. He wrote until he died. That's the real story. Not the story of Don Quixote, the character, but the story of Miguel the writer, a man who had every reason to give up and didn't, who faced a world that didn't care and created something anyway, who turned failure into art. We remember the art, we forget the failure, but they're inseparable. The art came from the failure. The years of struggle weren't obstacles to overcome. They were material. Miguel used everything. The war, the captivity, the poverty, the rejection. He processed it, shaped it, transformed it into fiction. Don Quixote is funny because Miguel learned to laugh at pain. It's sad because he understood loss. It's wise because suffering taught him things success never could have. The book is great because the man who wrote it had lived. That sounds obvious, but it's not. Plenty of people live hard lives and create nothing. Plenty of writers have comfortable lives and create masterpieces. There's no formula. But in Miguel's case, the connection is clear. The life fed the work. The work justified the life. He died poor. He died obscure. He died in pain. But he died having written Don Quixote. And Don Quixote means his life wasn't wasted. Everything he endured led to that. The 70 years of struggle produced 700 pages that changed literature forever. Was it worth it? We can't answer that. Miguel's the only one who could, and he's been dead 400 years. But he kept writing, which suggests he thought it was. He kept believing in the value of what he was doing, even when the world disagreed. That belief matters, not because it guarantees success, it doesn't. Most people who believe in themselves fail anyway, but without the belief, there's no chance at all. You have to think what you're doing matters. You have to believe your vision is worth pursuing. Otherwise, why continue? Miguel believed. Despite everything, he believed. And 400 years later, we're still reading the book he created, still thinking about Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, still arguing about what the novel means, how it works, why it matters. The book survived because it's true, not factually true, it's fiction, but true in a deeper sense, true to human nature, to the complexity of experience, to the way life actually feels. Miguel didn't lie, he didn't simplify, he didn't pretend to have answers he didn't have. He wrote about a mad old man who thinks he's a knight, and somehow, in that absurd premise, he captured something essential about what it means to be human, to dream impossible dreams, to fight unwinnable fights, to believe in ideals the world mocks, to keep going even when you know you'll fail. That's Don Quixote. That's also Miguel. The book is autobiography disguised as fiction. Miguel was the knight nobody wanted, fighting for a literature nobody valued, believing in stories the world had outgrown. He was right to believe. The world was wrong. Not immediately, not in his lifetime, but eventually. The verdict came in after he was dead, but it came in. Don Quixote won. Miguel won. The mockery turned to admiration. The indifference turned to reverence. The failed writer became the father of the modern novel. None of that would have happened if he'd given up, if he'd accepted the world's judgment, if he'd stopped writing after the first rejection, the 10th, the 100th. He would have died as he lived, forgotten, poor, defeated. Instead, he died having created something immortal, something that would be read by millions of people he'd never meet, in languages he'd never heard, in countries that didn't exist when he was alive. Something that would influence writers he couldn't imagine. Something that would survive wars, revolutions, the collapse of empires, the transformation of society. That's the power of stubbornness, of refusing to accept defeat, of believing your vision matters even when nobody else does, of working until you can't work anymore, of dying with your boots on, pen in hand, one more dedication to write. Miguel did it right. He gave everything to the work, and the work repaid him by making him immortal. Not the man. The man died, the work lives, the work will always live. That's enough. That's everything. That's what writers hope for. To create something that outlasts them. To leave behind words that matter. To be remembered not for their suffering, but for what they made from it. Miguel achieved that. The knight-errant who never was became the writer who always will be. What does it cost to create something that lasts? Everything. And Miguel paid it all. But here's what most people miss about his sacrifice. It wasn't noble, it wasn't romantic, it wasn't the suffering artist starving in a garret for his art. That's the myth. The reality was uglier. Miguel didn't choose poverty for his writing. Poverty was what he had. He didn't sacrifice success for art. Success was never an option. He wrote because he couldn't do anything else. Because every other path had closed. Because at 60, broken, writing was all that remained. The sacrifice wasn't dramatic. It was daily. It was waking up in pain and working anyway. It was writing when he was tired. It was continuing when nobody cared. It was choosing to finish the book instead of finding paying work. He was watching his family struggle while he pursued something that might never pay. That's the real cost, not martyrdom, attrition, the slow grinding down of a human being who won't quit. Miguel's hands hurt when he wrote. The years in captivity had left their mark. The chains had damaged joints, limited movement. Writing was physically painful. He did it anyway. His eyes were failing. Reading was difficult. Writing required him to lean close to the page, squinting in candlelight. He did it anyway. He was sick often. The poverty diet, the cold rooms, the stress. His body was giving out. He kept working. That's what sacrifice looks like. Not grand gestures. Stubborn persistence in the face of accumulating pain. Working when your body says stop. Writing when your circumstances say it's pointless. The money problem never went away. Even after Don Quixote became successful, Miguel saw little of it. Publishers kept most of the profits. Pirated editions flooded the market. Miguel couldn't stop them. Copyright law barely existed. He received an initial payment for the manuscript, nothing more. The book that would make millions for others over centuries made him enough to survive a few more years. That's it. He was still poor when he died, still struggling, still worried about money. Success didn't save him. It just let him keep writing. And he did. In the years after Don Quixote, Miguel wrote constantly. He finished the sequel. He wrote plays nobody produced. He wrote the exemplary novels, a collection of short fiction that showed his range. He wrote Perseus and Sigismunda, a romp. Ants, he believed, was his masterpiece. Nobody agreed then. Nobody agrees now. But he believed it. He was writing until the end, literally. In his final days, weak and dying, he wrote a dedication for Perseus. His hand was shaking. The letters were unsteady. He knew he was dying. He kept writing. The dedication is addressed to the Count of Lemos, his patron. It's touching and strange. Miguel jokes about his illness. He describes meeting a student who recognized him and called him famous. He sounds almost surprised by it. Famous. Him. At the end, after everything, he still couldn't quite believe it. The dedication ends with Miguel saying he hopes to see the Count again, though he doubts he will. He knows he's dying. He's saying goodbye. And even here, even now, he's thinking about the work. He mentions the books he still wants to write, projects he'll never finish, stories still in his head. He dies with unfinished business. Writers always do. There's always one more book, one more story, one more thing you wanted to say. Miguel died on April 22nd, 1616, the same day as Shakespeare. Probably. The dates are complicated. Spain had adopted the Gregorian calendar, England hadn't, so Shakespeare actually died 10 days later. But traditionally, they share a death date, the two greatest writers of their age, dying on the same day. It's too perfect, too symbolic, but symbols matter. These two men, working in different languages, different countries, different traditions, created something new. Shakespeare transformed theatre, Miguel transformed prose. Both invented techniques, all defined their forms for centuries. Both created characters that felt more real than real people. Both wrote about human nature with unprecedented depth. Both died unaware of how important they would become. The funeral was simple. Miguel had asked to be buried in a Franciscan habit. He'd joined the order late in life, a lay member, not a priest, but the association mattered to him. The Franciscans valued poverty. They served the poor. Miguel identified with that. His whole life had been lived among the powerless, the forgotten, the defeated. He wanted to be buried as one of them. The body was taken to the convent of the Barefoot Trinitarians in Madrid. His daughter Isabel was there, his wife Catalina, a few friends, not many. Miguel hadn't been a social man in his final years. He'd withdrawn into work. The grave was unmarked, or poorly marked. The exact location was lost within decades. In the 20th century, researchers tried to find it. They searched the crypt. They found bones that might be Miguel's. They can't be certain. It's fitting somehow. The man who created the most famous knight in literature has no monument over his actual bones. The body disappeared. The work remained. That's the trade. That's what writers accept. You give up your life. You get immortality, not for yourself, for what you make. Miguel's body is lost. Don Quixote is everywhere, in every language, in every country, in forms Miguel couldn't have imagined. Operas, ballets, films, television shows, comic books. The Knight and his squire have been adapted, reimagined, reinterpreted for 4 centuries. They'll be adapted for 4 more. The characters escape their creator. They belong to everyone now. That's success. That's what it looks like when a work transcends its origin. People who've never read the book know Don Quixote. The windmill scene is cultural shorthand. Tilting at windmills means fighting imaginary enemies. Everyone knows that. Most don't know it comes from Miguel. The phrase is older than the countries that use it, older than the United States, older than the British Empire at its height, older than the Industrial Revolution. Miguel wrote it when the world still thought the earth might be flat, when medicine was bloodletting, when most people couldn't read. And it's still relevant, still true, still resonant, because human nature hasn't changed. We're still dreamers. Till fools, still capable of magnificent delusion and genuine nobility, still fighting battles we can't win for reasons we can't explain. Don Quixote is every person who believed in something the world called stupid, every artist who kept working despite rejection, every inventor who kept trying despite failure, every activist who kept fighting despite defeat. The knight is all of us. The mad old man charging at windmills is humanity. And Sancho, practical Sancho, is also humanity. The part that knows better but follows anyway. The part that complains but stays loyal. The part that sees reality clearly but chooses to believe anyway. Together, they're complete. Neither is right, neither is wrong. They're both necessary. That's the insight. That's why the book matters. Miguel didn't choose between idealism and realism. He put them in dialogue, let them argue, let them contradict each other, let them both be true. The modern novel was born in that contradiction. Before Miguel, fiction picked sides. Romance was ideal. Picaresque was cynical. You wrote one or the other. Miguel wrote both simultaneously. He created a form that could hold opposing truths. That could be funny and sad, noble and ridiculous, inspiring and deflating. All at once. That's what makes it modern. That's what makes it ours. We live in contradictions. We hold opposing beliefs. We see reality and we see dreams. We're all Don Quixote and Sancho Panza at different times, sometimes in the same moment. Miguel understood that. He wrote it, and in writing it, he changed what fiction could do. After Don Quixote Novo, LS could be complex, could contain multitudes, could refuse to choose between tragedy and comedy, could be about ideas and character simultaneously, could mock and celebrate the same thing. Every novelist since has learned from that, even if they haven't read Miguel, even if they don't know his name. The techniques he invented have been absorbed into the form itself: interior monologue, unreliable narration, meta-fictional commentary, characters who argue about the story they're in. All of it comes from Don Quixote. The debt is enormous and unpayable. The English novel descends from Miguel. Fielding read him, Sterne copied him, Smollett translated him. They built on his foundation. Their successors built on theirs. Every comic novel, every novel about delusion, every novel where character. Let's argue about reality. Miguel is there. The ghost in the machine. The French claimed him too. Flaubert called Don Quixote the greatest book ever written. He read it repeatedly, studied it. Madame Bovary is a female Don Quixote, a woman whose head is full of romantic novels, who can't reconcile dreams with reality, who destroys herself pursuing the impossible. Same structure, same insight, same truth. The Russians were obsessed. Dostoevsky wrote that Don Quixote was the most profound thing the human mind had produced. He saw in the night a model for his own characters, idealists in a cynical world, innocents among the corrupt, believers surrounded by skeptics. Prince Mishkin is a Russian Don Quixote. So is Alyosha Karamazov. The night lives in them. The Spanish had to reclaim him for sea, and Turies they'd undervalued their own genius, treated Miguel as a curiosity, an old writer, a historical figure, not a living force. Then the generation of 98 rediscovered him. Unamuno wrote about the night constantly, saw in him the Spanish soul, the impossible idealism, the refusal to accept defeat, the dignity in failure. Miguel became a national symbol, the writer who defined Spanish literature, the figure all others measured against. That's 4 centuries of influence, and it's not slowing down. Recent decades have seen more Don Quixote adaptations than ever. More translations, more scholarly studies, more popular retellings. The night is immortal. Miguel succeeded. He created something that can't die, that adjusts to every era, that speaks to every generation, that means something different to each reader. That's the only immortality that matters. Not being remembered, being read, being relevant, being necessary. Miguel is all of those, 400 years gone, and more alive than most contemporary writers. That's the reward. That's what the suffering bought, not comfort in life. Miguel died poor, but eternal presence in the culture, a permanent place in human consciousness, the ability to speak to people who won't be born for centuries. That's worth it. That's the trade every serious writer would take. Die forgotten. Live forever in the work. Miguel took it. He had no choice, but he wouldn't have chosen differently. The work mattered more than the man. The work always matters more than the man. That's what he proved. That's his legacy, not the plot of Don Quixote. The fact that he finished it, that he kept working when there was no reason to, that he believed the work mattered when nobody else did, that he died writing. That's the lesson. That's what we learn from Miguel. Not how to write a novel, how to be a writer, which means working without guarantee, believing without evidence, continuing without encouragement, Finishing what you started, creating something that might outlast you. Might, no promises. Miguel got lucky. Most writers don't. Most work dies with them. Most books disappear. Most names are forgotten. That's the truth. The odds are terrible, but someone has to be Don Quixote. Someone has to be the book that survives. Might as well be yours. That's the gamble. That's what you're betting on when you write seriously. When you give years to a project. When you sacrifice other things. When you work despite the odds. You're betting that you might be the exception. That your work might be the one that lasts. That 400 years from now, someone might read what you wrote and feel something. It's a crazy bet. But so is charging windmills. So is believing you're a knight when you're just an old man. So is writing a novel when you're 60 and poor and nobody wants it. Miguel made that bet and won. Against all odds, against all logic, against all reason. The mad old man who thought he could write something that mattered. He was right. That's the dream. That's what keeps writers working. The possibility that you might create something permanent. Something that survives the moment. Something that speaks across centuries. But here's what nobody tells you about that dream. It's not actually about the future. It's about now. The work has to matter to you today. Not because it might matter to someone in 400 years, because it matters right now, in this moment, at this desk. Miguel understood that. He wasn't writing for posterity when he wrote Don Quixote. He was writing because not writing was worse. Because the work itself justified the effort. Because creating something gave shape to his days. That's the secret. The work is its own reward. Has to be, because everything else is uncertain. Publication, reception, legacy, all of it's a gamble. But the work itself, that's real. That happens. That exists whether anyone else cares or not. Miguel spent years on Don Quixote. Years when he could have been doing something else. Something more practical. Something that paid better. Something safer. He chose the work instead. Not because he knew it would succeed, because the work was what he had. His life had been chaos. Capture, slavery, poverty, prison, constant disappointment. The work was the one thing he controlled. The one thing that was his. Nobody could take that from him. They could ignore it, reject it, underpay it, but they couldn't stop him from doing it. That's power. That's freedom. Not the freedom to do nothing, the freedom to work on what matters to you, to spend your time on something you believe in, even if nobody else does. That's what made Miguel a writer. Not talent, not luck, not opportunity, the decision to work anyway, to keep working, to make the work the center. Everything else was peripheral. Everything else could fail. The work couldn't, because failure only exists in relation to external goals. If the goal is the work itself, you succeed every day you work. Miguel succeeded every day for years. Then the book came out. Then people bought it. Then it became famous. But he'd already succeeded. The success had already happened. In the writing, in the daily choice to continue, in the accumulation of pages. The publication was just confirmation. Nice confirmation. Welcome confirmation. But not necessary. The work was necessary. The work was what saved him. From despair, from meaninglessness, from the way, HT of his own failures. The work gave him something to do, something to be, something to care about. That's what work does. Real work. Work you believe in. It organizes your life, gives it structure and purpose, makes the days matter. Miguel's days mattered because he was writing Don Quixote, whether anyone would read it or not. That's the calculation every serious writer makes. Is the work worth doing for its own sake? If the answer is no, stop. If the answer is yes, continue. Miguel's answer was yes, every day for years. That's commitment. That's what it takes. Not genius. Commitment. The willingness to show up. To work without guarantee. To believe the work matters even when you have no proof. Especially when you have no proof. Miguel had no proof. He'd published other things. They'd done okay, nothing spectacular, nothing that suggested he was capable of creating something immortal. He was just another writer, competent, experienced, not young, not fashionable, not exciting, just working, doing what writers do, putting words on paper, day after day, month after month, year after year. That's how Don Quixote, not through inspiration, through accumulation, through the compound effect of daily effort, through showing up when he didn't feel like it, through working when the work wasn't going well, through continuing when there was no reason to continue except that he wasn't finished yet. That's the only reason you need. You're not finished yet. Miguel wasn't finished, so he kept writing. Then one day he was finished. The book was done. All those days of work had produced something complete, something that existed, something that could be read. That's the miracle, not the quality, the completion. Most people who start books never finish them. Most ideas remain ideas. Most projects die incomplete. Miguel finished. That alone puts him in rare company. That he also wrote something great. That's the bonus. But the real achievement is finishing, making the thing, bringing it into existence. That requires something most people don't have. Not talent, endurance, the ability to keep working when the work is hard, when you're tired, when you're discouraged, when you're broke, when nobody cares, when you're not sure it's any good, when you doubt yourself, when every rational calculation says stop. Miguel kept working through all of that. That's why he succeeded, not because he was gifted, because he endured. And here's what nobody mentions about endurance. It's not heroic, it's boring, it's the same task repeated, the same chair, the same desk, the same struggle to find the next word, the same doubt, the same difficulty every single day. Nothing changes except the page count. That's endurance, that's what it looks like. Not dramatic, not inspiring, just persistent. Miguel was persistent. That's his real lesson. Not how to write brilliantly, how to write persistently, how to keep showing up, how to make the work a habit, how to integrate it into your life so completely that not working feels strange. That's what professionals do. They make the work inevitable, not through discipline, through identity. Miguel was a writer. That's what writers do. They write. So he wrote, even when it was hard. The hardest part wasn't the writing. It was the uncertainty. Not knowing if the work would matter, if anyone would care, if the years of effort would produce anything except a manuscript nobody wanted. That uncertainty never goes away. You work in it, through it, despite it. Because the alternative is not working, and not working is worse. Miguel knew that. He'd had periods of not working, periods when circumstances prevented him. Captivity, poverty, prison. Those were the worst times, not because of the external conditions, because he couldn't work. The work was what made life bearable. Without it, there was just circumstance, just the grinding reality of being poor and old and forgotten. The work was escape, not from responsibility, into meaning, into purpose, into something that justified existence. That's what work does when it's real work, when it's work you care about. It makes existence meaningful. It gives you something to do that matters to you. Whether it matters to anyone else is secondary. Miguel's work mattered to him. That was enough. That had to be enough, because that's all you can count on. Then the book came out, and people bought it, and it spread, and suddenly the work mattered to other people too. That must have been strange for Miguel. He'd spent years working in private, in obscurity. Just him and the page. Then suddenly it was public. People had opinions, critics reviewed it, readers responded. The work wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the world. That's what happens when you publish. You give away the work, you hand it to strangers. You let them interpret it, misinterpret it, love it, hate it, use it for purposes you never intended. Miguel watched that happen. Watched Don Quixote become something bigger than he'd imagined. watched other writers imitate it, watched readers quote it, watched it enter the culture. That must have been satisfying, but also strange. RK had been his companion for years, his private project. Now it was everyone's. That's the trade. You create in private, you share in public, you give up control, you let the work go. Miguel let it go. Had no choice. Once it's published, it's not yours, it's theirs. The readers, the critics, the cultures. Your job is done. You made it. Now they decide what it means, and they decided it meant everything. The book became a phenomenon. Not just in Spain, across Europe. Translations appeared, editions multiplied. The knight and his squire became iconic. Everyone knew them. Everyone referenced them. The book became part of the shared vocabulary. That's the highest achievement. Not being read, being assumed, being so embedded in the culture that people reference you without thinking. Miguel achieved that. Within his lifetime, he saw Don Quixote become bigger than him. That's rare. Most writers who achieve cultural immortality don't see it happen. They die first. Miguel saw it, lived long enough to know he'd succeeded, to know the work would outlast him. That must have been comforting. In his final months, when his health was failing, when he knew the end way, close, he could look back and know he'd done something permanent, something that would continue after he was gone. Not many people get that certainty. Miguel got it. But here's the thing about certainty, it doesn't change the work. The work is what it is, whether people love it or ignore it, whether it becomes a classic or disappears. The work itself doesn't change. What changes is the context, the reception, the legacy. But the actual book, same words, same story, that's important to remember. The work is separate from its reception. You can't control reception. You can only control the work. So that's where you put your effort, into making the work as good as you can make it. Then you let it go. Then you see what happens. Miguel did that, made the work, let it go, got lucky, the luck mattered, but the work mattered more. Without the work, luck is irrelevant. You can't be lucky with something that doesn't exist. You have to make it first. Miguel made it first. That's the order. Work first. Everything else second. Publication second. Reception second. Legacy second. First you do the work. You sit down. You write. You revise. You finish. You make the thing. Then you see if anyone wants it. Then you see if anyone cares. Then you see if it lasts. But first you make it. That's the only part you control. The only part that's guaranteed. You can guarantee that you'll work. You can't guarantee anything else. Miguel guaranteed his work, showed up, wrote, finished. The rest was chance, good chance, lucky chance, but chance. He couldn't control it, didn't try to. Just made the work as good as he could and released it. That's all any writer can do. Make it good. Let it go. Hope. Miguel hoped. And his hope was rewarded. The book succeeded. Beyond his expectations, beyond anyone's expectations. It became one of the most important books ever written. 400 years later, we're still talking about it. Still reading it. Still learning from it. That's the legacy. That's what the work brought, immortality. Not for Miguel, for Don Quixote, for the knight, for the story. Miguel's just the guy who wrote it. That's how it works. The work becomes more important than the worker. The creation outlasts the creator. That's fine. That's how it should be. The work matters more. Always. Miguel understood that. He didn't write Don Quixote to be remembered. He wrote it because the story needed to exist, because the knight needed to ride, because the work demanded to be done. He was just the instrument, the person who happened to be there, who happened to have the skill, who happened to care enough to finish. That's all a writer is, the person who cares enough to finish. Miguel cared, so he finished, so the work exists, so we can read it, so the night rides on. That's the final lesson. The work matters more than you, more than your comfort, more than your certainty, more than your fear, more than your doubt. The work is what counts, whether you feel like working, whether you believe in yourself, whether anyone encourages you. The work is what matters. Do the work. Finish the work. Release the work. Then see what happens. You might get lucky like Miguel. You might not. But either way, you'll have done the work. Created something. Made something that didn't exist before. That's enough. That's everything. The work is the point, not the reward. The work itself. Miguel knew that, spent his whole life learning it, then proved it. With Don Quixote, with his final decade, with his dedication to the work even when everything else was falling apart. The woo, Arche held, the work mattered, the work lasted. That's all you can ask. Make something that matters, that lasts, that speaks to someone, anyone, everyone. Miguel made that, against all odds, despite everything, because he kept working, because he didn't stop, because he believed the work mattered even when nobody else did. He was right. 400 years, that's how long Miguel's been dead. And every one of those years, someone somewhere opened Don Quixote for the first time, discovered the night, laughed at the windmills, felt something shift. That's victory. Not the kind Miguel wanted. He wanted money, comfort, recognition, while he could use it. He got none of that, but he got something better. He got to be necessary. The books that survive aren't the ones that were popular. They're the ones that were true. The ones that captured something essential about being human. The ones that said something nobody else had figured out how to say. Miguel said it. Said that we're all caught between who we are and who we want to be, between reality and the stories we tell ourselves, between wisdom and madness, and that the line between them is thinner than we think. Don Quixote is still read because that tension never goes away. We're still dreaming impossible dreams, still fighting battles we can't win, still believing things that aren't true because we need them to be true, still following our own windmills. The night is us, was us in 1605, is us now, will be us in 2424. Human nature doesn't change. Miguel captured it permanently. That's what great work does. It freezes a truth, makes it permanent, puts it in a form that survives everything. Wars, revolutions, the collapse of empires, the transformation of society. The work remains because the truth remains. Miguel's truth remains, the gap between dreams and reality, the nobility and absurdity of human aspiration. The way we're all both knight and peasant, both idealist and realist, both Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. He didn't plan to write something immortal. He planned to write something good enough to sell, something that would pay his debts, something that would let him survive a few more years. He got that. Barely. What he also got without planning it was immortality, the accidental kind, the kind that comes from being honest, from not trying to impress anyone, from just writing what you see. That's the trick. Stop trying to write something important. Just write something true, true to what you've observed, true to what you've experienced, true to what you understand about people. The importance takes care of itself. If it's true enough, if it's honest enough, if you don't lie. Miguel didn't lie. He wrote about an old man who went mad from reading too many books. He wrote what he saw around him, the Spain of rogues and priests and peasants and nobles, the Spain nobody else was writing about, the real Spain, not the official version, the version you saw if you travelled the roads and stayed in terrible inns and talked to ordinary people. That's Spain, the true one. Truth survives, everything else fades, the lies fade, the propaganda fades, the official versions fade. The truth remains. Miguel's truth remains. 400 years and counting. That's the reward for not lying, for not simplifying, for not pretending you have answers you don't have, for showing things as they are. Complicated, contradictory, funny and sad simultaneously. The work outlasted everything.